the next essay is written by N. Ram. The title of the essay is Evolving Politics of Citizenship in India. His essay deals with his competence and speciality, that is, the evolving politics of citizenship in India. He starts his essay with B.R. Ambedkar's last speech to the Constituent Assembly and recalls how he warned India against bhakti or hero worship in politics. He had invoked John Stuart Mill's famous question to people interested in the maintenance of democracy to not lay their liberties at the feet of even a great man, or to trust him with the powers which enable him to subvert their institutions. Then, on a personal note, he talks about how he has a birth certificate which does not have his name, but his parents' name, which was quite a common practice in those times. But he says that maybe he will be able to prove his citizenship because of his background, etc. And he has some other documents. But he says that, do you think that every Indian who's living in India can provide all these documents? In his words, how many of us among India's current population of 1.38 billion have the documentation, the resources, the stamina to prove our citizenship, or right to citizenship by birth or descent or whatever, to official bureaucratic satisfaction in an arbitrary, undemocratic, biased and surveillance-oriented citizenship regime? Then he moves on to talk about political history of citizenship in India. He divides it into 4 chapters. The first chapter begins with the making and provisioning of citizenship in Part 2 of the Constitution till the enactment of Citizenship Act 1955. The second chapter is relatively quiet period between 1955 and 1985. The third chapter covers period from 1986, when citizenship law was amended to make special provisions for Assam in line with 1985 Assam Accord to till the period of 2003-2004. The fourth chapter, which is for the continuing period, starts from what has been happening since 3rd December 2004, when the Citizenship Amendment Act 2003 came into force, and with it a new citizenship regime came into force in India. He then says that, borrowing the words of lawyer Mihir Desai, that he has argued that CAA is unconstitutional, but even if the Supreme Court holds it to be constitutional, then also the the protests are justified and they should be continuing. He says so because the entire process of NRC is skewed against the poor and the marginalized. The basic idea is that the poor and the marginalized are the ones who are the kind of people who will not be having all the documents that are required to prove their citizenship. To prove his points, he talks about Assam, where NRC took place. It took time between 2013 and 2019 for the process of NRC to be completed in Assam. Millions of people were left out of the list. He argues that poor and marginalized are most vulnerable because they may not have the required documents to prove their citizenship. He says that NRC in Assam should serve as a warning to the rest of India on what a countrywide NRC would turn out to be for the millions of people in India. He also underlines the arbitrary powers given to the local registrar, who can mark any citizen as doubtful, and this would serve as Damocles sword hanging over every citizen who comes under this regime. He then goes on to talk about the famous chronology speech of Home Minister Amit Shah, in which he said that first we'll bring the Citizenship Amendment Bill and we'll give citizenship to Hindus, Buddhists, Sikh, Jain and Christian refugees, the religious minorities from the neighboring countries. Then we will implement the NRC to flush out the infiltrators from our country. He says in BJP speak, infiltrator is code for Muslim illegal migrants and refugee is code for non-Muslim illegal migrants. He then talks about citizenship during independence and partition. He says that India's constitution's second part that dealt with citizenship did justice to the people by giving them citizenship by birth or by their parents' birth, as those were turbulent times. and he says that it was quite inclusive and it did not leave people out on any basis. The implementation may have been flawed and may have defied the spirit of the constitution, but it never infringed upon the letter of the constitution. He also talks about how there is enough material available in the Constituent Assembly debates, where some members use refugees for Hindu displaced persons and migrants for Muslim displaced persons. But he says that India did not really discriminate with people based on their religion, and India delivered to these migrants the greatest amount of justice and the most practical solution of the problem, as it was said by Jawaharlal Nehru during those times. He then argues in some detail how being a citizen and being a voter are intertwined because in a democracy, citizens have political rights. He then talks in some detail about how when India became independent, most of the Indians became voters of India before even they became a citizen of India. Then he analyzes the provisions relating to citizenship in the constitution in some detail. He says that Article 5, which said that if you or your parents, broadly speaking, reside within the territory of India, when the commencement of this during the commencement of this constitution, then you are a citizen. He then talks about Article 6 and 7. He says that some problems arose with Article 6 and 7. Some members of the Constituent Assembly argued that Hindus and Sikhs should be given priority in citizenship as they had nowhere else to go. But an overwhelming majority of the Constituent Assembly rejected the proposition of making religion a basis for citizenship. Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, who was an influential member of the drafting committee, had also said that such proposal of basing citizenship on religion is against the principles of secularism. He then says that these discussions in the Constituent Assembly were confined to the specific context of partition, but then he goes on to say that these values are not to be treated as dead by today's India. He then moves to talk about citizenship in the times of BJP rule. He says that it is time-tested way for chauvinists and authoritarian political leaders to advance in political arena by stigmatizing aliens and hurling at them words like infiltrators, aggressors, termites, terrorists, etc. He then talks about how the rise of BJP from the ashes of Janasangh and how BJP transformed itself into a neo-right party in great detail. Then he talks about for BJP and Sangh Parivar, the undesirable alien has been the Muslim illegal migrant or infiltrator, but a Hindu illegal migrant is a refugee to them. So, to victimize and isolate Muslims, it is ready to accommodate Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, and even Christian illegal migrants. He writes that BJP had 3 decades ago worked out a solution in principle for the illegal migrants. It wanted them detained and deported, but the secular constitution and stubbornly religious blind citizenship laws came in their way. Then the author launches into deep analysis of election manifestos of BJP in the past decades, where they had said that they will send the infiltrators away many times. The author ends his essay with a dark note by saying that by subverting the principles of a secular state that found resonance and prevailed in the Constituent Assembly debates, it poses a threat to constitutional morality as well as political stability. Apart from this, NRC process will have the effect of causing tremendous hardship and harassment to the million of the poor, the dispossessed and the marginalized, drawn from all communities, considering that at some stage documentation is not possible for them to prove their claims of citizenship. So this was my book summary for the half of this book, and I'll be reviewing the half of the book in coming weeks, as the book is not very not very lengthy. Every essay is around 25 pages or 30 pages, and I would recommend everybody to read these essays because these are written by great scholars and they throw light on something very important and interesting. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading these books. But I would like to point out that if the language may be a little difficult, because one of the specialties of scholars is that they write things, even simple things, in a very complex way. Thank you very much for watching. Next Sunday, I'll be reviewing 40 Rules of Love by Alif Shafak. See you then. Take care. Stay safe.